Okay. So I'll just introduce Laurence Lejeune. I thank her for our late timing because it's 11:30 p.m. In Montreal right now. Laurence is a part of the Canadian Scientific Platform group, part of the executive. And she comes from a flow cytometry background. She's worked in both clinical and academic labs and is now an independent consultant. And about 6 months ago, we got funding to look at the impact of research infrastructure on research productivity. And I was able to have Laurence as our project manager. So it's been really great having somebody who's actually paid and able to commit real time to the project. So I wanted to bring her on board today because she's done most of the work, I think, to prepare the slides for my presentation. And she'll be here for the Q&A after the presentation in case anybody has any questions. So.
Probably having motion sickness over there.
Okay, I think we're good. All right, so I've already introduced Laurence. So this is the Socio-Economic Impact Working Group. Basically what I'm going to try to do is give you a bit of an understanding of what socioeconomic impact, or SEI, is. Give some examples of how it can be measured, some indicators we could use to evaluate SEI. And this group, we spent quite a bit of time at the beginning and decided that we really want to focus on these workhorse imaging facilities. It's usually much easier to talk to funders and convince funders when you have these really large, unique pieces of technology that are not necessarily accessible to everybody, that this needs to be supported and so on. But it's these workhorse facilities where we have these microscopes that are being used 50, 60 hours a week, and hundreds of labs are depending on them that I think need the tools to show that their value. And then the plan of the group is to develop an international guideline for imaging facilities to follow so that they can measure their socioeconomic impact. So one of the really important things is to have correct terms and correct definitions. So I'll have some audience participation here. What would you call these? Trousers? Anybody else? Slacks, yeah. Pants. Well, we got them all. Anything else? No, those are the ones we had. So we're all talking about the same thing, but we have 3 different names for it. And I think I'd like to draw the analogy to the HR session tomorrow, or yesterday, when everybody's talking about an imaging scientist, but every institution has their own HR terms and different definitions for the exact same thing. So we need to make sure that we're clear on our terms. And I think this will be really important in an international setting. We also have to have common definitions, so a high quality lens. So depending which group you're talking to, they may have a very different idea of what a high quality lens is. So we're using the same term, but people have different objects in mind when they think of that. So again, we need to have a consensus on the terms we're going to use and the definitions of those terms. So we were a very timely working group. We perfectly planned everything, and this wonderful international report came out, I think about a month after we formed the group. So it's a reference framework for assessing the scientific and socioeconomic impact of research infrastructures from the OECD. And we've been extensively using this document for building the working group and the ideas that we have around how to measure socioeconomic impact. So just a definition of what is socioeconomic impact. So the impact itself is the intended or unintended effects of a research infrastructure activities and outputs over its life cycle. So this could be all the way from setting up the infrastructure to its end of life. Indicators are ways to measure the quality or value of that research infrastructure, its activities and its output. And you really have to have indicators with adequate data to make them meaningful. So you have to be able to collect enough information about that indicator in order to make it a valuable measurement that people can look at. And then we have the life cycle phases. So we have the phases over which the research infrastructure lifetime: preparing, construction, operation, upgrade, and decommissioning. So we have basically the 2 sort of metrics. We have the economic impact, so the direct or indirect economic activities and returns that can be created by the infrastructure. And then we have the social or societal impact. the effect of the activities on the social fabric, well-being of communities, individuals, and society as a whole. So one thing that became really clear when we were moving into this area is that socioeconomic impact is not the same thing as performance. And performance really relates to the efficient use of the resources. And a lot of people are used to this kind of terminology, and I think it's come up a few times over the last day and a half of key performance indicators. So things like publications, users, citations, financial success. But performance doesn't necessarily equal impact. So I was thinking of a silly example. So I was thinking you could have a group of researchers who are deciding what is the best way to boil water. And they're going to come up with many different ways to boil water, and they're going to write protocols and procedures and publish those, but that's not going to have a very big impact on society. So impact has to be have a transformative effect of the research infrastructure, and it's not necessarily directly related to performance. So in looking at the OECD document, there's really two ways to measure socioeconomic impact. So one is having these core impact indicators, and this is a list which can provide a general picture of the impact. And the second, I think, is really important, and I think has come up also in our other discussions, is having stories. So telling a story about a specific infrastructure and how that's impacted the community, the scientific community, and the community at large. And I think you need to have both of these because the socioeconomic indicators are not as sort of hard and fast as key performance indicators, and so the stories can put it into context. So this is an example that Laurence had found of a framework for measuring impact, and I'm not going to go into the details of this slide, and I think for the purposes of the working group, we know that most facilities are not going to have the capabilities of doing this kind of a socioeconomic analysis. So this is maybe where we would want to be if we had the resources and the tools in place to measure that, but we wanted to put something a little bit lighter in place that would be accessible to the average facility. So we use this other diagram, the reference is there, basically pulling in 5 aspects of socioeconomic impact, and then putting in sort of general terms that sort of fall under that. So universities can be important for training and dissemination, media and debate could be public outreach, and so on. And then we were trying to think of at least an initial pass of what are the types of things we can measure for imaging infrastructure for these different categories. So for instance, for training and dissemination, we have imaging scientists, we have the HQP that are being trained in the facilities, the reputation of the facility, competitive advantage and innovation can be through corporate partnerships, patents, internships for HQP in corporate partners. Societal good, health and the environment, so new technologies, medical treatments, green solutions could be examples there. Public outreach, I know a lot of institutions do public seminars on different disease treatments and awareness campaigns, K through 12 programs. Chris had that nice example of the 3D printed microscopes yesterday. And then knowledge and instrumentation expertise, so we're training the next generation of scientists in cutting edge technologies with unique expertise and applications. So the goal of the group is basically to select the most appropriate indicators for a life cycle mission statement of a typical imaging facility, to recommend the best type of data to measure those indicators, and then demonstrate types of narratives and success stories. And one of the ways you want to do that is look at success stories in the global bioimaging sphere as examples that imaging facilities could use to build their own stories about their success. And I think that's my last one. So this is the makeup of the working group right now, and it's been a very productive group, I think, over the short period of time we've been working together. And I just put up our Canadian groups and NSERC because they've funded Laurence in this study of looking at impacts of research infrastructure.
Thanks a lot, Claire. That was extremely clear, and I think it's really very helpful. I think especially as many people in the imaging facilities come from a science background and a research background, I think to us the words impact and performance are always kind of evil sphere you don't ever want to think about. But they really are the key arguments you have to make to your own administration and to your funders in order to sustain the investment and to increase this. And so this is a really important area, and I think, again, if we can provide guidance to our community on it, it will have a tremendous enabling ability. Yeah. So are there questions for Claire?
Or for Laurence?
I just have the gender balance.
We didn't do it on purpose.
You're welcome. You just volunteered, John.
Did you want to say the same thing, Spencer?
That was a great presentation, Claire, and it's really important to put things in that kind of context. For facilities, core facilities, shared resources, often it can be in the institutional context that sort of vision of what is the impact has to be posed. And along those lines, I found myself recently looking at the Sustainable Development Goals recommendations from WHO and seeing how that links into other things. Do you have any comment about perhaps the SDGs or how it might relate to the OECD report you put up there? And also the notion of that institutional vision, how that could be a part of leveraging what would be the...
So the question is taking like the vision of the institution and integrating that into the performance indicator, or the socio-economic?
Did you look at SDGs at all? Because I found this was a whole thing. I hadn't ever thought about SDGs. And someone said to me, SDGs, and I said, what is that?
Right.
So I spent a year looking at,
yeah.
And so you can pick out of the 17 different SDGs, or you can pick the ones you're relevant to, and it links to reports like the OECD. Maybe they mentioned that.
So I can say from my perspective, I have not. I can ask Laurence, have you looked at SDGs, Laurence?
So, sorry, what are SDGs?
Maybe I can make a comment.
Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, so the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you.
I was just,
This is really, you know, when you want to measure something, you need to know the mission or the vision of the institution. So sustainability is part of certain aspect of what you're looking at. There's been lots of studies out there that are looking at different types of infrastructure, not only bioimaging. And some of them are really related to sustainability. For us, at this stage, we don't have clear ways to measure that. It really depends on the definition you give to that. So there's lots of things out there, especially on that respect. You need to clarify the expectation from the institution if they have these kind of things they want to measure. And once you know what they're expecting, then you can get a better idea of how to measure it. But other than that, there's lots, indicators, there's many of them. There's tons of publication. This is a very big research area. And I'm sure, depending on what you're looking at specifically, we can find something that fits. And you can have the same conversation with your institution and talk the same language. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but...
I think so. There's a couple comments from the audience, so...
yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things that we'd done when we were looking at a 10-year forward planning process was look at the Sustainable Development Goals, because for us in Microscopy Australia, we've got such a broad range of uses. I think we felt that we could actually put forward kind of like a case study or an impact story that covered around about 12 to 14 of the total goals. And so when you think about how critically underpinning your research, the research infrastructure is in answering some of those major challenges across the globe, it was one of the things that we put forward to our federal government.
I can just confirm that. Also we are also looking very seriously at sustainable development within EMA at the moment, and so I think clearly, imaging technologies are very enabling for the right kind of science that is needed for that. But I think that also from an institutional perspective, I think organizing your work with self-renewing core services rather than with putting all the technology into individual research groups is a much more sustainable way of doing it. So I think there are several aspects of that again we can use as arguments, because we are addressing many of these things that people are formulating in general ways, and I think Phil probably knows a lot about this too.
Well, in upper administration, we are given strategic goals. We have some that we create, but some the institutional create. So aligning cores turns out to be a whole lot easier than aligning what the faculty do, because the faculty, and that included myself for 22 years, I don't care about the institutional. I have my own goals, and they're research-driven, but institutionally and administratively, the people that look at core facilities like, especially if you can align with the institution. And what that might mean is we want to improve the cost effectiveness of our research program, and core facilities can do that. We want to help recruit and retain elite faculty, and we can help with that. And you just start to align each of the strategic goals with what you do.
Can I make another comment quickly? Another thing that can be very driving, and if you have a group of people international like that, this is the core facility, the scientific platform, can definitely be the one driving these sustainable development goals. Because some institutions, some are very advanced and they have very clear goals, including the core facilities in what they do, but some, they are very disorganized still, and sometimes when you come up with the idea, and it's with a level of international groups like you use, can really help you push forward your goals within your institution. So this is also an option that we do sometimes in Canada. And if you have a big enough group, and that's precisely why we created CNSP, you can definitely drive towards the goal you want, and you can be part of the solution as well.
I think in the interest of time, we probably should be moving on. If that's a very urgent job. Or,
You can join the working group.
since you didn't really have a question the first time, I'll give you.
Should I join it? Just a comment. I mean, I think the OECD papers, which is quite big as well, is giving a lot of tracks. I mean, really. I mean, you have many possibilities, and you have to figure out how you fit with this kind of thing. I think it's a very interesting thing. I don't know if it's
Very good. Okay, I think with that, let's thank Claire again for the great presentation.